Hey guys, tonight we wander into lantern-lit vineyards, just as dusk begins to settle and the cicadas hum lazily in the background. Imagine yourself trudging down a dirt path lined with grapevines, their purple clusters glistening with the last light of the day. You catch a whiff of fermenting fruit, sweet, sharp, and slightly suspicious, the kind of smell that suggests someone nearby has already been stomping around in a vat barefoot. You pause, because honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week in this ancient Mediterranean countryside without Wi-Fi, bug spray, or at least a sturdy pair of sandals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing those little dots on the globe light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The vines sway, and the air feels heavy with promise. You don't know it yet, but you're stepping into the myth of Dionysus, a god whose life reads like an oddly charming soap opera, crossed with a travel diary. You wander further, brushing past leaves sticky with grape must, and in the flickering glow of lanterns, you feel the boundary between ordinary farmland and divine myth dissolving. You imagine peasants kneeling to tie back vines with rough twine, not realizing the god of wine himself might be strolling just a few paces ahead, disguised as a friendly stranger. That's the thing with Dionysus. He is everywhere and nowhere, slipping into banquets and slipping out of them just as fast. One historical tidbit for you. Archaeologists have uncovered countless little votive cups dedicated to him, tucked into shrines across Greece. And yet, historians still argue whether the worship of Dionysus began as a fringe cult, or if it was woven into village life from the very start. The vineyard around you feels timeless, but also slightly ridiculous. Somewhere out there, a satyr is probably tripping over his own hooves. You almost expect to hear a flute tune cut through the night air, off-key but enthusiastic. You're not alarmed though. You're oddly comforted. If anything, you feel as though you've been invited to one of the god's endless feasts, where wine flows in clay cups and olives are piled high on wooden platters. Picture yourself stepping off the path into a clearing where an old amphora lies tipped over, its clay cracked, and a sticky dark stain seeping into the soil. It's not water, it's wine, long since dried, maybe offered here centuries ago. People really did leave offerings to Dionysus in the form of wine libations. But here's the quirky part. Sometimes they also offered honey cakes shaped like little phalluses, which must have made the priests keep a very straight face during ceremonies. The air grows warmer as you keep walking, and you notice little lamps glowing between the vines, set there by worshippers who wanted the god to feel welcome. One lamp flickers beside a bunch of grapes so large they look unreal. It's theatrical, and it reminds you of how Dionysus himself loved drama. Later, when plays began being staged in his honor, the god became inseparable from theater. That's the seed of tonight's story, how the love of food and performance twine together. But don't rush. You're still savoring the first sips of atmosphere. Imagine yourself plucking a grape from a low branch. It bursts in your mouth, tart and sweet, sticky on your fingers. You laugh quietly to yourself, because this snack is absurdly ordinary. And yet, it's also the very beginning of the concession stand idea. Before roasted chickpeas or honeyed figs, there were just grapes, passed hand to hand in Dionysian festivals. People ate them during performances, as casually as you'd munch popcorn in a cinema today. The night deepens, and a warm breeze ruffles your hair. The lanterns sway. You realize you've slipped into a story that doesn't care whether you're mortal or divine. It just wants you to sit back, sip from the endless amphora, and listen. Dionysus is near, you can sense it, a playful presence somewhere in the vineyard. Maybe he's the rustle of the leaves. Maybe he's that hiccuping laugh you thought you heard behind you. Whatever the case, you're not alone here, and the journey is only just beginning. Your eyelids grow heavy, but the vineyard seems endless, stretching in every direction, a labyrinth of leaves and lanterns. Each step forward feels like stepping deeper into the myth itself. And here's the soothing paradox. You don't need to know where you're going. The god of revelry thrives on detours, on zigzags, on you taking a bite of something strange just because it's offered. This myth isn't about racing to a finish line. It's about lingering, tasting, and laughing quietly when a satyr spills wine all over his fur. So you walk on, guided by the faint hum of distant pipes, and the sweet, sticky air of an eternal vineyard. And slowly, you let go of where you came from, easing into this myth-soaked landscape where the line between story and reality dissolves like sugar in warm wine. You wander deeper into the vineyard until the vines part and reveal something far stranger than grapes or lanterns. A figure looms in the dusk, tall, thunderous, and entirely unbothered by the fact that his thigh is glowing faintly like an overstuffed bakery oven. This, of course, is Zeus, king of the gods, wielder of lightning, and apparently an improvised incubator. You pause, tilt your head, and realize you're witnessing a birth story that feels more like a medical misunderstanding than divine glory. Dionysus, the god you'll be trailing tonight, did not arrive in the world the usual way. His mother, Semele, a mortal princess, had been seduced by Zeus. And when Hera, Zeus's perpetually suspicious wife, found out, she tricked poor Semele into demanding to see her lover's true form. The poor woman was incinerated by the sight of divine lightning. Proof that dating Zeus comes with more risks than a reality TV relationship. But the baby inside her belly was not lost. Zeus, in a move that's equal parts resourceful and unsettling, sewed the fetus into his thigh. You stand there, staring at his muscled leg as though it's a particularly odd wineskin, until at last the stitches part and a squirming infant slides into the world. Congratulations, you've just witnessed the only recorded case of thigh birth. Historians still argue whether this myth was meant to symbolize the fertility of the vine being grafted, or whether it was just an ancient poet's idea of a practical joke. Either way, you now understand why Dionysus is sometimes called twice born. The vineyard air seems to shimmer as the child cries out, and suddenly the cicadas quiet down, almost in respect. Nymphs rush forward, their arms outstretched, wrapping him in soft cloths. One of them holds up a little cup of watered wine, because of course, hydration is necessary, even for gods just seconds old. You can't help but grin at the absurdity. Even as a baby, Dionysus is already associated with wine, as though the universe couldn't wait to hand him his signature drink. You shuffle closer, peeking over shoulders, and catch sight of the tiny god's curious expression. He doesn't cry long. Instead, he stares wide-eyed at the glow of the lamps around him, as though taking mental notes for all the future stage lighting he'll inspire. You realize something important here. Myths aren't subtle. They don't whisper symbols, they throw them in your face. A god of wine literally sewn into the king of gods' thigh. That's about as subtle as serving nachos at a funeral. Zeus, looking oddly proud of himself, hands the child over to Hermes, the ever-speedy messenger. You overhear Zeus muttering something about needing a babysitter who can outrun Hera's wrath. Hermes winks and disappears into the vineyard shadows with the baby in tow. That detail, Hermes as caretaker, shows up in some variations of the myth, while in others, nymphs or even rustic mountain spirits take the role. Scholars still debate which version was told first, but the fact remains, baby Dionysus grows up in hiding, cradled by nature and constantly dodging his stepmother's wrath. You follow Hermes' trail, leaves crunching underfoot, until you stumble into a quiet grotto lit by fireflies. There, the infant god rests in a cradle woven of vines. The nymphs hum lullabies, and you notice they sprinkle drops of honey into his mouth. Quirky detail for you. Honey was often given to infants in Greek culture, not just for sweetness, but as a symbol of divine nourishment. Later, honey would play its own part in festival foods. For now, it just dribbles down the baby's chin in sticky rivulets. You crouch down, resting on your heels, listening to the soft snores of the nymphs as they guard him. There's a calmness in the air, but also a ridiculousness you can't shake. The god of wine, destined for endless revelry, begins life as a smuggled child hidden in caves, wrapped in grape leaves. It's like imagining a future rock star growing up in a basement surrounded by guitar picks. Every so often, you hear Hera's angry voice carried on the wind, like distant thunder. She is searching. You flinch, but Dionysus just giggles in his sleep, unbothered. That's his gift, even as a baby, transforming tension into joy, fear into laughter. You think about how myths work. They exaggerate the bizarre in order to remind mortals that life too is bizarre. And right now, watching a baby emerge from Zeus's thigh, you can't deny the reminder. The fireflies blink, casting soft light on the infant's tiny fingers. You find yourself lulled, almost hypnotized by their rhythm. Each blink feels like a stage lamp testing its glow before the curtain rises. Somewhere in your mind, you understand the thread being pulled. Birth, light, theatre, performance. Dionysus is not just a god of wine. He's the god of stories told aloud, of spectacles staged beneath the stars. And that destiny began here, with a thigh, a cradle of vines, and the laughter of nymphs echoing in a cave. You rise from the grotto, brushing dust off your knees, and follow the faintest sound of giggles weaving through the trees. The baby you just saw has grown, as myths tend to accelerate the timeline, and now you're trailing a mischievous child with curls as wild as grape tendrils. Dionysus toddles across the countryside, and everywhere his little feet land, something grows, vines twining up olive trees, leaves curling across rocky walls, grapes bursting in clusters where only weeds once stood. It's like following a toddler with a gardening superpower. You try not to trip on the vines snaking behind him, though at one point you swear a satyr's tail whips across your ankles, just to see if you'll stumble. The godchild is not shy. He giggles loudly, waves his arms and shouts words you don't understand, but the land seems to answer him. Farmers glance up from their ploughs to find their fields suddenly dotted with creeping vines. Some look pleased. They see free wine in their future. Others look worried, as though the unexpected plant invasion might strangle their crops. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's myth was partly a metaphor for how grape cultivation spread across Greece. Was it a cultural memory of farmers adopting viticulture, retold as a child god sprinkling vineyards across the land? The debate remains open, but tonight you simply follow the trail of leaves and laughter. At one point, Dionysus toddles into a goat pen. The goats, curious and perhaps sensing something divine, don't headbutt him. Instead, they nibble vines that sprout instantly under his touch. One goat sneezes grape juice straight onto your tunic. You glance down at the stain, sticky, purple, and surprisingly artistic. Congratulations, you've just invented tie-dye centuries early. The child claps his hands, delighted at the chaos, before scampering off again. You pass through villages in his wake. Women pause from weaving to find tendrils curling around their looms, and children chase after Dionysus, trying to catch grapes as they drop like candy from the air. Somewhere, an old man mutters that this will all end badly, that Hera will notice sooner or later, and indeed, thunder grumbles in the distance, a reminder that the Queen of Olympus is not thrilled about Zeus's illegitimate offspring leaving grape graffiti across the land. You stumble into a meadow where nymphs have gathered to play. Dionysus rushes into their arms squealing, and they scoop him up, tossing him high. He giggles so hard you almost forget he's divine. The nymphs begin weaving garlands of ivy, not just grapes, around his little head. Ivy, after all, is his other sacred plant, said to cool the heat of wine's intoxication. The symbolism is layered, but you don't need to analyze. It's enough to see a child crowned in green, wriggling with delight. One nymph hands you a cluster of figs, freshly plucked. You bite into one. It's sweet, grainy, with a honey-like aftertaste. Quirky tidbit. Figs were among the first cultivated fruits in the Mediterranean, and some scholars argue they were even more important than grapes in early diets. But here, in Dionysus's world, figs become the sidekick to grapes, the snack that hints at future concessions. You chew slowly, realizing you're tasting the same flavors festival-goers once did before a tragic play began. As the child runs on, the vines begin to take stranger forms. One curls into the shape of a chair, another into a makeshift stage. You can almost hear future audiences settling in, crunching something in their hands as they wait for actors to enter. Dionysus doesn't pause to admire his handiwork. He just giggles and darts forward, planting the seeds, literally, for theatre and feasting yet to come. At the edge of the meadow, you catch your breath. The ground is sticky with juice, your sandals stained purple, and your mind swirling with the odd duality of this godchild. Playful prankster, agricultural innovator, and mythic symbol of joy and disorder. He doesn't stay still, and neither can you. You realize you're in for a long walk, perhaps a lifetime, across lands where vines tangle everything they touch. But for now, you smile, because what other story lets you say you once slipped on? A grape planted by a toddler god? The cicadas start up again, loud and rhythmic, like background percussion for Dionysus's roaming performance. You keep walking, eyes adjusting to the twilight, as the vines spread endlessly onward, reminding you that joy and chaos often sprout from the same root. You press further along the path, brushing past grape leaves sticky with dew, when the scent changes. It's no longer the sharp tang of raw fruit, but something richer, sweeter, like honey seeping into warm bread. You find yourself standing before a ring of nymphs, their hands busy with little trays of food that glisten in the lantern light. Dionysus, now a small boy, sits cross-legged in their midst, face smeared with crumbs and nectar. Tonight, you've stumbled into his first experiments with what you might call snacks of the gods. The nymphs whisper to one another as they pass around bowls of ambrosia, that mythical food of immortality. To your surprise, it doesn't look grand. It resembles a golden porridge, fragrant with herbs and honey. You dip a cautious finger, taste it, and realize it's strangely comforting, like oatmeal that's been kissed by sunlight. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient writers actually described ambrosia as a honey-like substance, while others imagined it as divine dew collected from blossoms. Historians still argue whether ambrosia was meant to be symbolic, or if the Greeks borrowed imagery from actual ritual foods. You shrug, licking your finger. It's delicious either way. The boy god smacks his lips and gestures for more, but he's not only eating. He begins tossing crumbs to satyrs hovering nearby. They scramble like pigeons in a city square, snatching every morsel. You laugh quietly. It feels familiar, like sharing popcorn in a theatre aisle. Already, Dionysus is blurring the line between sacred food and casual snacking. One nymph leans close and offers you a fig dipped in honey. You bite into it, and the crunch of tiny seeds feels oddly like modern candy. Another hands Dionysus a ball of barley dough, rolled with herbs and sesame. He tries to juggle it, fails spectacularly, and ends up with sticky hands. The nymphs clap anyway, as though failure itself were part of the performance. You think of how later Greeks would eat maza, barley cakes often soaked in honey or olive oil. It's not hard to picture these humble cakes evolving into festival food, eaten while actors declaimed lines on stage. Dionysus licks his sticky fingers and tilts his head thoughtfully, as though even at this young age he senses the importance of what just happened. Food, he realizes, isn't just for filling bellies. It's for sharing, for laughing, for making a moment linger. That's the heart of concessions, after all. A satyr suddenly prances too close and snatches the last honey cake from the tray. The nymphs gasp, but Dionysus bursts into laughter. He waves his hand, and where the cake had been, a vine sprouts instantly, bearing grapes ready to burst. You crouch to examine them, wondering if you should pluck one, but then you notice the ground beneath your feet. Crumbs, seeds, sticky drops of honey. It's already messy. You chuckle because it's the earliest record, perhaps, of spilled snacks at a live show. The air grows thick with fragrance, honey, wine, roasted barley. Your stomach growls softly, though you know this feast is more symbolic than filling. You watch Dionysus lean back, full and drowsy, but his eyes are alive with mischief. Even now he's rehearsing, playing with the idea of food as performance, as ritual, as something more than sustenance. You recall how Greek festivals to Dionysus would later combine offerings with drama, feasting with storytelling. Was this mythic child's messy snack time a foreshadowing? Scholars might debate, but for you, the image is clear. A boy smearing honey on his cheeks, nymphs humming lullabies, satyrs crunching stolen barley cakes. It's an amphitheatre in miniature, complete with audience participation. The fireflies blink brighter, and you feel a hush settle. The nymphs place the boy in a bed of ivy leaves, his belly round with ambrosia. You watch his chest rise and fall, steady, untroubled. Around him, crumbs remain scattered like tiny stars, each one a reminder that even divine stories are told through ordinary bites. And you, sitting cross-legged on the ground, realize you're full, not of food, but of the calm absurdity of the scene. It's not a feast for survival. It's a feast for company, for the pleasure of crunching and chewing while the night carries on. You feel yourself smiling, even as your eyelids grow heavier. Maybe this, too, is a kind of ambrosia, the simple act of eating with friends, real or imagined, under a sky that doesn't care if you're mortal or divine. Your sandals squelch slightly as you step into the next clearing, and for a moment, you think the ground is muddy. But no, it's grape juice. The air here is thicker, warmer, and humming with the unmistakable scent of fermentation. You realize you've wandered into the place where Dionysus first discovers the art of pressing grapes. And suddenly, the whole scene looks like a mythic combination of harvest festival and backyard science experiment gone wrong. In the center of the clearing stands a large wooden vat, hollowed from a tree trunk and dark with stains. Satyrs gather around it, their hairy legs sticky from the knees down, as they stomp in rhythm, splashing juice over the rim. Dionysus, still young but already radiating mischief, shouts directions like a conductor leading a chaotic orchestra. His curls bounce as he points. Harder! Faster! Left foot! Right foot! And the satyrs laughing obey. You tiptoe closer, careful not to get sprayed, though you know it's a lost cause. With a sigh, you give in, climb the rim, and step inside the vat. The juice is cold, slippery between your toes, and you almost lose your balance. The satyrs roar with laughter, clapping you on the back, until you find a rhythm and stomp along with them. Quirky tidbit for you. Ancient grape pressing really did involve bare feet, and the practice lasted well into the modern era in parts of Europe. It wasn't just efficient, it kept the seeds from being crushed too hard, which would have made the wine bitter. And here you are, participating in history, or at least mythology, with sticky toes to prove it. As the juice sloshes and foams, Dionysus hops down into the vat himself. He doesn't just stomp, he dances. His little feet slap the liquid in perfect rhythm, and soon the satyrs mimic his steps. You realize you're watching the invention not just of winemaking, but of performance intertwined with food. The grape press becomes a stage, the stomping a dance, the juice a prop. You wonder if the earliest Greek theatre might have borrowed its energy from scenes like this. Messy, communal, intoxicating in every sense. The smell grows headier as the juice collects in clay jars at the vat's base. A nymph dips her hand, tastes and wrinkles her nose. Not ready, she mutters. Fermentation, after all, takes time. And here's where scholars still argue. Was Dionysus's myth originally about the discovery of fermentation itself? Or did the Greeks already know how to make wine long before his cult rose? The archaeological record suggests winemaking predates his stories, but myths have a way of claiming credit. Either way, in this clearing tonight, it feels brand new. Dionysus wipes juice from his forehead, leaving purple streaks like war paint. He grabs a handful of grapes and presses them against your palm, as if inviting you to take some home. You laugh because you know there's no home to take them to. You're adrift in his myth now. Still, you slip a few grapes into your pouch, their skins already splitting, their sweetness promising. Off to one side, a satyr experiments. He rolls grapes in leaves and tosses them into the fire. They sizzle, pop, and char, releasing a smell not unlike roasted chestnuts. Everyone groans in delight. And within moments, the first impromptu snack of roasted grapes makes its appearance. You take one, blow on it, and pop it into your mouth. It's smoky, sweet, and unexpectedly good. Something you imagine might have been offered at rustic festivals, long before olives and figs became standard fare. The vat grows quieter as stomping slows. Dionysus, breathless and sticky, sprawls on the rim, his little chest rising and falling with satisfaction. He looks around at the satyrs, at the nymphs, at you, and for the first time you notice a glint in his eyes, not just joy but cunning. He's realized something important. Food and drink are better when tied to rhythm, to story, to performance. Pressing grapes isn't only about making wine, it's about making a scene, an event, a memory. You wipe your feet on the grass as you step out, but the stains remain. Purple streaks mark your ankles, your toes. You grin despite yourself. These stains are the price of joining a myth. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you imagine telling a modern audience, "Sorry, I can't come to work. I was busy inventing concessions with Dionysus." Not a bad excuse. Really, the jars of juice glisten in the lamplight. The air feels heavy, almost dizzying, though you haven't even sipped. You realize this is what Dionysus offers. Not intoxication from drink alone, but intoxication from togetherness, from stomping in vats until you can't stop laughing, from realizing food itself can be performance art. You take one last look at the boy god smeared in grape stains, and then the night wind tugs you onward, carrying the scent of fermentation deeper into the story. The trail winds out of the grape-stained clearing and into a softer darkness, where the trees arch like a vaulted ceiling and the night hums with cicadas. You brush past vines that seem to curl in invitation, and before long, you notice the landscape shifting again. Not fields of pressing vats now, but a small glade set up like a theatre in miniature. Flat stones form a semicircle of seats, their surfaces smoothed by countless satyr haunches. In the centre, a low platform rises, barely knee-high, and lit by torches wedged into the earth. You realise, with a start, you're walking into the earliest experiments of theatre itself, and it's Dionysus who sits cross-legged on the stage, his grape-stained tunic now partly dried, his curls damp with dew. He looks older than before, though only by a whisper. Something in his eyes glimmers with confidence. Around him, satyrs and nymphs lean in, waiting for his next trick. He raises a clay cup of juice, not yet wine, and begins to speak, not loudly, not even clearly at first, but with a rhythm, a cadence that draws everyone closer. He tells a story, one you don't quite understand, but his gestures carry it. A tilt of the wrist, a widening of the eyes, the sudden stomp of his foot on the platform. Each gesture pulls gasps, giggles, or applause from the satyrs. Without realizing it, you're witnessing the invention of performance as ritual. Food and drink, story and body, all fused together. Quirky historical aside, later Greeks would credit Thespis as the first actor, the man who stepped away from the chorus to play a role. But here in this glade, centuries before, Dionysus seems to be rehearsing that very idea. One body holding the attention of many, a story spilling out as both feast and drama. Some scholars argue that early theatre was an extension of Dionysian worship festivals, the dithyrambs, which were choral hymns sung in his honour. Imagine a chorus of 50 men in masks, chanting and stomping in rhythm. Less Shakespeare, more musical ritual. You can almost hear the echo of that future in Dionysus's playful monologue. The satyrs cheer when he finishes, and in response, he beckons them to join him. They scramble onto the stage, grab handfuls of grapes, figs, and roasted nuts, and begin to improvise. One pretends to be a king, ordering another around. Another stuffs his cheeks with so many grapes he can barely speak, to the audience's delight. A nymph begins humming, low and steady, and suddenly the whole thing feels like structured chaos. Snacks becoming props, food becoming punchline. You can't resist. When Dionysus points to you, the satyrs hoot and clap until you climb up. They hand you a fig leaf crown far too large and shove a clay cup into your hands. You bow clumsily, earning laughter, and then, unsure what else to do, you recite the first thing that comes to mind. Perhaps a line of poetry you half remember, perhaps a greeting. It doesn't matter. The crowd roars as if you've spoken divine truth. You realize now, in this moment, the performance is not about the script, but about the sharing. A satyr drops to all fours and pretends to be a donkey. Another rides him like a general, while yet another pretends to fall asleep mid-performance. Snoring so loudly the audience howls. You join in, holding your cup aloft, and the little stage becomes a riot of laughter, movement, and spilled juice. It's messy, unscripted, half-accidental, but isn't that what theatre often is? A series of accidents that become tradition. As the laughter fades, Dionysus signals, and the group quiets. He pours a little of the juice onto the earth, a libation, and the mood shifts. The torches flicker, shadows deepen, and the satyrs murmur as though they understand. This is not just entertainment. This is offering the food, the performance, the laughter. It's all for something larger. For the vines themselves, for the cycles of growth and decay, for the mysteries that tie drink and dream together. You sit back down on the stone seats, breathing in the mingled scents of smoke, juice, and damp earth. The cicadas hum again, as if marking the end of an act. You feel that peculiar stillness when a performance concludes, the hush before clapping, the shared glance between strangers that says, "Yes, we were here, we witnessed this." Dionysus bows deeply, not as a god, but as a performer, sweaty, sticky, grinning, and in that bow, you glimpse the beginning of a tradition that will stretch for millennia, from village festivals to grand amphitheatres. A god teaching mortals that stories, like food, are best when shared aloud. The torches dim, the satyrs scatter, and the path calls again. You rise, fig leaf crown askew, and step back into the forest. The night wind tugs at your tunic, carrying with it the faint echo of laughter and applause, like a curtain falling on Act 1 of a story still unfolding. You drift onward, barefoot now, because somewhere in the last performance a satyr borrowed your sandals for a gag and never returned them. The forest floor is surprisingly soft, moss cushioning each step, and the air smells of roasted chestnuts and damp pine. You follow the laughter until it fades into a new sound entirely. Rhythmic claps, a slow beat, like hands on skin, or perhaps wooden sticks striking together. The trees thin out, and you arrive at another clearing, this one ringed with crude benches carved from fallen trunks. Here, the satyrs and nymphs are gathered in circles, bowls of figs and plates of roasted grain scattered between them. It's not performance this time, it's contest. You realize you're watching the very beginnings of audience participation long before game shows and open mic nights. Dionysus sits at the center, lounging like a referee who's had one too many cups of whatever it is he's drinking. He calls out names, or maybe just points, and the chosen satyr or nymph stands, cup in hand, ready to impress. The rules seem simple. You must entertain the group using whatever snack you've been given. And here's the twist. You can't eat it until your bit is done. A satyr with a walnut steps forward. He cracks it against his forehead with exaggerated drama, pretends it's the skull of a giant enemy, and narrates the battle in squeaky falsetto. The crowd howls. Another balances 3 grapes on his nose and attempts to juggle them into his mouth. He fails spectacularly. 1 grape bouncing into the fire, another rolling into your lap, the third squashed under someone's hoof. More laughter. And you? You're not safe. Dionysus's gaze flicks toward you again, and before you can slink into the shadows, a nymph presses a roasted chestnut into your palm. The crowd claps expectantly. You stand, chestnut in hand, and for a wild moment you panic. What exactly does one do with a chestnut? Then inspiration strikes. You cradle it like a precious egg, narrating in an overly serious tone that it's the last seed of the world, destined to sprout a forest that will outlast time itself. You nearly convince yourself you're in a Greek tragedy until the chestnut slips dramatically from your hand, bounces off your knee, and rolls into a pile of goat droppings. The audience explodes with laughter. You bow, cheeks warm, and sit back down as Dionysus raises his cup in salute. It dawns on you, this is how ritual becomes theatre, and theatre becomes tradition. Through play, through mistakes, through the absurd insistence that even a chestnut can hold cosmic meaning. Mainstream fact time, Greek comedies, centuries later, often revolved around food jokes. Aristophanes, for instance, filled his plays with references to figs, fish, bread, and wine. One might argue the roots of satire, pun intended, lie right here in Dionysus's snack-based contests. And the quirky tidbit? Ancient Athenians sometimes threw dried chickpeas at actors during performances. Half insult, half snack donation. Imagine getting pelted mid-monologue, but at least having lunch. Historians still argue whether these contests were the origin of structured drama or just drunken games that occasionally got formalized. Either way, the blurred line between feast and theatre remains here in this firelit clearing. Eventually, the satyrs grow restless, and the competitions shift. Someone starts a rhythm on an overturned bowl, another claps along, and soon the entire gathering pulses with improvised music. Nymphs spin, their hair trailing like ribbons, while satyrs stomp in patterns that are more enthusiastic than coordinated. The food is still everywhere, half-eaten, scattered like props. You notice Dionysus laughing hardest when someone trips or spills a drink, as if chaos itself is part of the entertainment. You lean back on your elbows, watching sparks rise into the night sky. For a moment, you forget you're supposed to be a visitor, not a participant. You feel woven into the group, like the laughter has stitched you into their fabric. The claps and stomps blur into a steady lull, hypnotic and strangely calming. But just when your eyes begin to droop, Dionysus leaps up, claps twice, and the whole clearing falls silent. He declares the contest finished, the snacks officially sacrificed to the gods of comedy, and the night ready for its next stage. Everyone cheers, tossing grape stems and nutshells into the fire as if sealing a pact. And with that, the crowd begins to move again, following Dionysus into the deeper woods. You rise, brushing crumbs from your tunic, and join the flow. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you're amused to realize that what you've just witnessed might one day inspire amphitheaters and scriptwriters. Yet right now, it's just friends, food, and a god who can't resist a good punchline. You trail the throng deeper into the woods, the firelight behind you dwindling to a soft orange echo. The night air sharpens, cooler, wetter, and the path opens into yet another stage of Dionysus's strange festival. This time it isn't laughter that greets you, but the low, hypnotic buzz of bees. You blink, and there before you rises a cluster of woven hives, shaped like little wicker baskets, perched on flat stones. Around them, satyrs and nymphs move carefully, as if tending a sacred grove. Honey. The smell hits you before the sight does. Thick, golden, intoxicating, sweeter than the grape-stained air of earlier clearings. Clay pots stand open, their contents gleaming amber in the torchlight. Some satyrs dip reeds into the honey and twirl them like lollipops, their tongues shining as they lick slowly. Others drizzle it over roasted figs, turning snacks into something sticky and ceremonial. Dionysus appears again, naturally, barefoot, his tunic smeared with pollen this time, as though he personally rolled in the flowers just to make a point. He raises a honeycomb high, and juice drips down his arm as he declares in a sing-song tone that bees are his secret helpers. You catch a few mutters from the crowd about ambrosia, the food of the gods, and you realize this is no ordinary midnight snack. It's divine branding. Mainstream historical fact slides into your thoughts. In ancient Greece, honey was indeed considered sacred, associated with offerings to gods and the nourishment of heroes. Priests of certain cults were called melissae, bees, because of their association with purity. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some Greeks believed that honey, when fermented, was the first form of alcohol humans ever tasted, long before vineyards were cultivated. So in a way, Dionysus is showing off his backup plan. If the grapes fail, the bees have his back. Historians still argue whether early Dionysian rituals included honey explicitly, or if later traditions retrofitted it into his mythos. Standing here, watching a satyr dunk an entire handful of roasted chestnuts into a honey pot, and then shake his sticky fingers in delight, you lean toward believing it was part of the story all along. Dionysus sets the tone for this act with a mock-serious performance. He smears honey across his lips, pretends it's the golden mask of a tragic hero, and recites a melodramatic speech about the sorrow of lost sandals. The audience groans and giggles, and soon the performance dissolves into everyone smearing honey on each other. A sticky free-for-all that leaves satyrs glistening like caramel statues. One even pats your shoulder with a honey-dripping palm, leaving you both amused and slightly revolted. You wipe your arm on the grass, but there's no escaping it. Honey is everywhere, slick on the ground, oozing down clay pots, clinging to fingers that reach for yours in playful camaraderie. The sweetness is overwhelming, cloying, almost dizzying. Maybe it's the sugar rush. Maybe it's the heady smell of beeswax and smoke. But you feel strangely euphoric, as if the whole forest has turned into a dessert. To shift the mood, a group of nymphs begins humming again, low and resonant. The sound weaves around the drone of the bees, creating a layered hum that vibrates through your chest. Dionysus gestures for silence and then dips his reed into honey once more. He raises it like a conductor's baton, and the nymphs swell their humming to match his movements. It's absurd, really. An orchestra led by a honey stick, but the effect is mesmerizing. You watch the sticky baton paint invisible arcs in the air, and the forest seems to pulse in time. Your eyelids grow heavy in the rhythm, lulled by sugar and song. But just as you nearly doze, a satyr jolts the crowd awake by slipping on a honey puddle and sprawling spectacularly, his hooves flailing. Everyone bursts into laughter again, Dionysus most of all, and the spell is broken, but not unpleasantly. This seems to be the rhythm of the night. Trance, accident laughter repeat. When the honey feast winds down, the satyrs scrape the last dribbles from the pots, licking their hands like children unwilling to waste dessert. Dionysus claps once, declaring the hives officially honored, the bees appeased, and the honey anointed as yet another snack worthy of theatre. You stagger back into the trees, sticky, buzzing faintly with the taste of sugar still on your tongue. Somewhere ahead, another torch flickers, promising yet another act in this unfolding festival. You sigh, amused and weary, realizing that by dawn you might be carrying half the pantry of ancient Greece on your tunic. The forest grows quieter again as you shuffle along, your skin still tacky with streaks of honey. A breeze cools the stickiness, carrying with it the smell of smoke. Not sharp, not choking, but fragrant, like herbs tossed into a hearth. You step into a clearing where small clay braziers glow with embers. Around them, satyrs crouch, prodding at flat rounds sizzling on hot stones. The sweet haze of baking grain fills the night air, and your stomach, despite the figs and honey and everything else, growls audibly. Bread. Of course. You've stumbled upon the most ordinary yet sacred snack of all. The satyrs tear little pieces, tossing them from hand to hand, laughing when someone fumbles and drops a steaming morsel. Dionysus is here too, though now he looks oddly domestic, kneeling by a brazier, smearing oil onto a flat cake as if auditioning for a cooking show. He glances up at you, winks, and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "Everyone's grandmother knew this trick." Mainstream historical fact drifts in. Ancient Greeks relied heavily on barley bread, often baked as simple flat cakes over stones or in portable clay ovens. Loaves as we imagine them today were rare. Most daily bread resembled thick pancakes or unleavened rounds. And here's the quirky tidbit. They sometimes flavored these with wild herbs, onions, or even bits of cheese. An early form of snack customization that wouldn't look out of place in a food court. Historians still argue whether bread was ever central to Dionysian rituals, since wine was his true domain. Some say bread belonged more to Demeter's cult, the goddess of grain. Yet standing here, watching Dionysus sprinkle herbs theatrically while satyrs clap as if he's the star of a cooking demonstration, you suspect boundaries between gods were often porous. Who wouldn't want snacks at a wine festival? The performance this time feels subtler. Instead of wild improvisations or sticky honey slapstick, the satyrs begin a quiet ritual. They pass pieces of bread in a circle, each adding a gesture. One kisses the piece before handing it over. Another balances it on his head first. Another sings a nonsense rhyme as he gives it away. The bread makes its way to you at last, warm in your hands, fragrant with smoke and thyme. You hesitate, then mimic the earlier performer, placing it solemnly on your head before passing it on. The group erupts in approving cheers. Congratulations, you've just invented slapstick communion. Dionysus claps, clearly delighted, and then demonstrates his own method. He takes a piece, dips it dramatically into honey, sprinkles it with crushed nuts, and bites it as though tasting the food of Olympus. Crumbs tumble down his tunic, which only makes the crowd cheer louder. You can't help but laugh. This is both absurd and strangely profound. The quiet deepens as the bread dwindles. Satyrs lick their fingers, nymphs hum a lullaby-like tune, and the braziers burn lower, casting red halos on the ground. Someone begins telling a story, something about a mortal baker who challenged a god to a flatbread contest. The details are fuzzy, partly because the storyteller's mouth is still full, but the gist seems to be that the mortal lost, the god won, and bread became a divine gift rather than just daily fare. You lean back against a tree, eyes heavy, savouring the lingering warmth of bread in your stomach. It's comfort food, timeless, the kind of thing that makes you feel momentarily at home, even when you're in the middle of a forest full of half-drunken goat men. But Dionysus isn't done. He stands, brushes crumbs from his lap, and raises a piece of bread high. He tears it in half with exaggerated drama, letting the pieces fall into the embers, sizzling faintly. The satyrs gasp as if this were the climax of a tragedy, a symbolic sacrifice perhaps, the grain returning to fire, life feeding death feeding life again. For a brief moment, everything feels solemn. The flames crackle softly, the nymph's humming slows to a drone, and you sense the weight of tradition forming, piece by piece. This isn't just food anymore. This is performance, offering, ritual, all braided together like strands of dough. Then predictably, the spell breaks. A satyr sneezes loudly, spraying crumbs across the circle. Dionysus bursts into laughter, and the solemnity collapses into giggles. The bread has done its work. It's fed, entertained, and taught. And now it's simply crumbs on the ground. The path beckons again. You rise, brushing flour dust from your tunic, and step back into the woods. Behind you, the braziers dim, the last smoke curling upward like a sigh. Ahead, another torch flickers. More snacks, more stories, more accidental theatre await. The air thickens with the smell of roasting meat as you follow the path, and your sticky, honey-streaked tunic almost seems to tighten around your shoulders in anticipation. A satyr darts past carrying a skewer longer than he is tall, chunks of something sizzling on it, juices hissing as they drip into the flames of a fire pit up ahead. You step into the clearing and find yourself in what looks suspiciously like the prototype for a street food festival. Several spits rotate slowly over open flames, each turned by a satyr who clearly takes his job too seriously. One chews on a sprig of rosemary like a cigar, Another wears an apron that looks suspiciously like a repurposed goat hide, and all of them glare at anyone who reaches too early for a morsel. The aroma is outrageous. Smoke, herbs, fat. Your stomach growls again, even though by now you've consumed enough ancient snacks to fuel a small city-state. Dionysus presides nearby, reclining on a log like a food critic awaiting samples. He has a fresh crown of ivy, slightly askew, and a smirk that suggests he already knows which satyr will win tonight's impromptu grilling contest. He raises a cup and announces, with theatrical flair, that this round is all about flavour and presentation. You're not sure whether you've stumbled into a sacred rite or the world's first barbecue cook-off. Mainstream historical fact surfaces. Ancient Greeks often grilled meat at festivals, especially small cuts on skewers known as obeliskoi. These were cheap, portable, and perfect for feeding crowds. Archaeologists have even uncovered ceramic grills with slots designed to hold skewers, proof that souvlaki has been around for millennia. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some records suggest that theatre audiences in Athens munched on snacks like roasted chickpeas or skewered meat during plays, meaning Dionysus may have been the original concession stand entrepreneur. Historians still argue whether eating during performances was encouraged or frowned upon. Some claim it broke the solemnity of tragedy, while others insist the whole event was a festival, so why not feast? Watching satyrs argue over who has the crispiest lamb cube, you're inclined to side with the feast always camp. A satyr finally presents his skewer to Dionysus, holding it aloft like Excalibur. The god sniffs it dramatically, takes a bite, and pretends to faint from delight. The crowd howls. Another competitor tries a different tactic. He skewers grapes alongside the meat, claiming to have invented a balanced flavour profile. Dionysus chews, makes a face of mock tragedy, and declares it too avant-garde. Inevitably, you're dragged into the contest. A satyr thrusts a half-cooked skewer into your hands and pushes you toward the fire pit. The crowd chants expectantly. You wave the skewer around like a magician's wand, then narrate a ridiculous story about how each chunk represents a fallen warrior from a mythical battle. The crowd oohs and ahs at your solemn tone until the meat slips off and plops into the dirt. The satyrs collapse in laughter. Dionysus applauds anyway, declaring you the innovator of ground-seasoned cuisine. You sit back down, cheeks warm, stomach hungrier than ever, and finally, someone tosses you a properly cooked piece. You bite in, it's smoky, tender, ridiculously good. Suddenly, all of this makes sense. Why snacks are never just food in Dionysus's world. They're excuses for performance, community, accidents that turn into legends. As the fire burns lower, the satyrs begin turning skewers into props. One uses his like a sword, dueling another who wields a ladle. Another balances his across his horns and pretends to be a kitchen god. The crowd eggs them on, laughter bubbling as high as the flames. It's chaotic, ridiculous, yet strangely structured, as if improvisation itself is the ritual. Dionysus raises his cup one last time, spilling wine, or maybe grape juice, it's hard to tell, onto the ground. He declares the feast complete, the sacrifices accepted, the audience thoroughly entertained. The satyrs cheer, then collapse in a heap of satisfied exhaustion. The smell of charred herbs lingers as you stand, stretching, ready for whatever comes next. You step back into the shadows, belly warmed, mind buzzing. The path winds on, and you can't help smiling at the thought. Theatre might have been born not just from songs and masks, but from the simple truth that nobody tells a story quite as enthusiastically as someone holding a snack. You follow the winding path once more, the echoes of sizzling skewers fading behind you. The forest hushes, cooler now, and your bare feet sink into a carpet of pine needles. The torches ahead glow faintly blue, not from flame, but from jars filled with fireflies, their bodies blinking like tiny lanterns. You step into the glow and realize this clearing is not about food exactly. It's about drink. Clay jars are lined up along a low stone wall, some sealed with wax, others already uncorked, their contents sloshing faintly. The satyrs swarm like children at a lemonade stand, dipping ladles into the jars and passing cups around. Dionysus himself leans casually against the wall, swirling a cup of dark liquid, his expression both smug and experimental. You're about to assume it's wine, but the smell stops you. This isn't the sharp tang of grapes. It's something lighter, sweeter, almost herbal. Mead, fermented honey water, the world's other ancient alcohol. Dionysus notices your curiosity and holds up his cup with a grin, announcing in a mock lecture voice that tonight's feature is the drink of poets, dreamers, and people who run out of grapes. Mainstream historical fact floats to mind. Mead was widely consumed in ancient cultures across Europe and Asia, often predating organized viticulture. While not typically central to Greek drinking culture, it was known, and sometimes mythologized, as an archaic, almost primal beverage. And the quirky tidbit? Some accounts suggest that bees were thought to carry messages from the gods, so their honey-fermented drink carried a touch of divine legitimacy. Historians still argue whether Greeks used mead in ritual contexts or simply treated it as an exotic import. Tonight, in this firefly clearing, Dionysus seems to be making his case. If it ferments, it belongs to him. The satyrs begin an impromptu tasting contest. One downs an entire cup in a single gulp and immediately launches into a drunken ballad about a goat who fell in love with a tree. Another insists the drink makes him see double and spends the rest of the performance arguing with his own shadow. Dionysus howls with laughter, then declares that anyone who drinks must perform, no exceptions. Of course, a cup is thrust into your hands. You hesitate. The liquid gleams amber in the firefly glow, almost too pretty to drink. But you sip, and warmth spreads instantly, sweet and floral. Unlike anything you've tasted. Your tongue tingles. The satyrs cheer. Someone hands you a reed flute and pushes you forward. You can't play flute, not in this life or the last, but you puff into it anyway, producing a wheezy honk that sends the crowd into fits. You bow dramatically, mead sloshing from your cup, and Dionysus applauds like you've just invented symphonic music. The fireflies blink in rhythm as the performances spiral. A nymph recites poetry with honey dripping from her fingers. Another juggles clay cups until one shatters, and a satyr attempts a solemn dance only to trip and land in a jar. The laughter rolls over you like a tide, punctuated by the sweet, heady aroma of fermented honey. Eventually, Dionysus grows thoughtful, or as thoughtful as a god of revelry can. He lifts his cup, tilts it toward the stars, and declares that drink itself is theatre. Each sip transforms the performer, loosens the tongue, blurs the line between script and improvisation. He winks at you as if to say, this is the real reason snacks and stories go hand in hand. The satyr's quiet, swaying slightly, and for a brief moment, the clearing feels timeless. Fireflies drift overhead like living constellations. The jars glow softly, and the sweet tang of mead lingers in the back of your throat. It's peaceful, hypnotic, until someone burps loud enough to shake the jars, and the spell breaks into raucous giggles again. When the last drops of mead are gone, the satyrs tip the jars, spilling the dregs into the earth as libation. Dionysus bows to the bees. Yes, actually bows. And the crowd disperses. You wipe sticky sweetness from your lips, step back into the cool forest, and feel the night deepen. Each clearing is a stage, each snack a prop, and you're drifting ever deeper into this odd, eternal play. The forest seems quieter now, the air damp with dew as you follow a faint glow ahead. The satyrs have vanished in scattered directions, some humming drunken ballads, others snoring in bushes, leaving you alone with the muffled crunch of pine needles beneath your steps. The glow ahead grows stronger, flickering like a hearth, but the scent is unmistakable before you even arrive. Roasted nuts, warm and earthy, mingling with smoke. You step into a glade ringed with low stone benches, and at its center stands an enormous bronze cauldron balanced on 3 lion-shaped legs. Flames lick its base, and inside the pot, heaps of chestnuts tumble and pop, their skins cracking open like tiny firecrackers. Nymphs sit cross-legged around it, blowing gently on the steaming nuts before passing them around on broad fig leaves. The smell alone is enough to tug you closer, a memory you didn't know you had. Autumn evenings, the faint char of shell, the sweetness that hides inside. One nymph waves you over, pressing a piping hot chestnut into your palm. You juggle it from hand to hand, laughing at your own discomfort, until you finally peel back the blistered skin to reveal the golden heart within. The first bite is creamy, nutty, strangely comforting. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Roasted nuts have long been a staple in Mediterranean diets, from chestnuts in Greece to almonds and walnuts traded across empires. Nuts were portable, nutritious, and easily stored, making them both everyday fare and occasional treats at festivals. And now for the quirky tidbit. The Greeks sometimes associated certain nuts with fertility and the underworld. Hazelnuts, for example, were used in love charms, while walnuts were thought to house tiny spirits. Imagine someone nibbling walnuts nervously during a play, half expecting a ghost to crawl out mid-performance. Historians still argue whether chestnuts themselves were common in classical Greece, or whether their widespread cultivation came later with Roman influence. But tonight, fact blends with myth, and the cauldron bubbles as if chestnuts have been here forever. You sit among the nymphs, watching them peel nut after nut, their fingers moving deftly, their laughter soft. One claims that each chestnut eaten ensures a dreamless night. Another insists the opposite, that roasted nuts spark vivid visions. They argue cheerfully, passing handfuls around, daring each other to test the theory. Dionysus appears suddenly, reclining on a bench as if he's been there the whole time. He plucks a chestnut, tosses it high, and catches it in his mouth with a grin. "See?" he says, cheeks bulging slightly. Snackable suspense. The best part of theatre isn't always the plot. It's the pause, the little edible punctuation marks between acts. The satyrs trickle back in, drawn by the smell, and chaos returns. One attempts to juggle chestnuts straight from the cauldron, yelping and flinging them skyward. Another tries to tell a heroic story while his mouth is too full to articulate, spitting fragments of nut across the circle. The audience collapses in laughter, and even you, caught mid-bite, nearly choke from giggling. You lean back, savouring the warmth of food and fire. The nymph beside you whispers conspiratorially that in some villages, chestnuts were believed to ward off lightning strikes. She points to the firelit sky as though daring Zeus to prove otherwise. You're half tempted to pocket a few chestnuts just in case. The cauldron hisses, the fire crackles, and for a moment, the scene feels like a campfire story that never ends. The combination of roasted nuts, laughter, and flickering flame is both ancient and universal. You could be in Athens, Rome, or a random roadside fair 5 centuries later. The snacks don't care about borders. They just taste like comfort. Dionysus raises his cup, now filled with who knows what, and toasts the cauldron. "Remember this, traveller," he says, his tone suddenly mock solemn. "Theatre without snacks is just philosophy with costumes." The satyrs cheer, mouths full, and you can't help but agree. Nutshells stuck between your teeth and all. As the last chestnuts are scraped from the bottom of the cauldron, the nymphs hum a low song, rocking slightly as though cradling the night itself. You feel heavy-eyed, belly warm, and for a fleeting instant, you believe the whisper, that roasted nuts really do ward off restless dreams. When the fire dies down, the clearing grows quiet once more. You brush bits of shell from your lap, rise slowly, and step back into the forest's cool breath. The path stretches ahead, winding deeper into mystery, but the taste of chestnut lingers, grounding you in the present like a secret anchor. The forest path twists like a lazy serpent, guiding you to a clearing where the scent of something sweeter than chestnuts fills the air. You catch it before you see it, honey thick and golden, sticky even in thought. It coats your imagination the way it clings to a spoon, impossible to rush, slow and indulgent. When you finally arrive, the sight is absurdly theatrical. Dionysus himself, perched on a low stool, holding a clay pot tilted dramatically as streams of honey ribbon down into shallow bowls. Around him, bees hum with unsettling cooperation, as though they've been bribed with free tickets to the show. You sit among a small crowd of satyrs and nymphs, all watching intently as he drizzles honey across cakes of barley and figs. He gestures with exaggerated flair, as if narrating the arrival of a tragic hero. One satyr claps each time the honey lands in a neat spiral, while another heckles from the back, demanding more dramatic drizzle. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Greeks used honey not only as a sweetener, but also as a preservative, mixing it with wine or spreading it on bread, sometimes even rubbing it into wounds. Honey was medicine, offering both nourishment and cure. And now a quirky tidbit. In certain myths, bees were said to be sacred messengers of the gods, and some believed they carried the souls of the dead. That gives a new angle to your sticky snack. Imagine every bite as a possible chat with your ancestors. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek honey cakes were everyday treats or rare luxuries saved for rituals. Tonight, however, the debate dissolves under Dionysus's grin as he pours honey so generously it drips from his elbow. The satyrs cannot control themselves. One shoves his face directly under the dripping pot, squealing as honey mats his hair. Another dips his tail, then whirls it like a paintbrush, splattering golden flecks across the clearing. Even the nymphs lose their composure, giggling as they smear honey on figs and dare each other to eat without using their hands. You watch as Dionysus tilts the pot toward you. Honey slides into your bowl in one long golden ribbon. The warmth of the liquid seeps into your fingers through the clay, and when you lift it to your lips, the taste is overwhelming. Sweet, floral, lingering. It coats your throat, slows your breath, makes you feel as if time itself is moving at honey's pace. The god smirks. Theatre snacks aren't about hunger, he says softly. They're about anticipation. Each taste is a pause, a little silence between words. Honey holds the audience as surely as a mask does. He licks his fingers unapologetically, then adds, plus, it's sticky enough to make you think twice before dozing off mid-scene. The satyrs are already staging their own mini-play with honey cakes. One plays a tragic hero, whose downfall is slipping on a sugar-slick fig. Another pretends to be a bee buzzing angrily at the theft, stinger exaggerated into a spear made of bread crust. The crowd howls in laughter, rolling on the grass. You're half lost in the absurdity, half mesmerized by the bees that circle above, glowing faintly in the torchlight. The nymph beside you whispers that some claim bees were born from the tears of the sun, others from the carcass of a lion. She shrugs, pops a honeyed fig into her mouth, and says through sticky lips, either way, they make snacks worth watching. The drizzle slows, the pot empties, and Dionysus wipes his hands on a satyr's fur with casual disregard. The bees drift away, humming their approval, leaving behind the faintest vibration in the air like a final bow. The god yawns, stretches, and gestures toward another path. Come, he says, we're not done tasting yet. The theatre is only as good as its buffet. You stand, wiping honey from your fingers onto a patch of grass, though the sweetness still lingers. Each step feels slightly heavier, as if you're being carried forward in syrupy time. The forest waits, patient, ready for the next flavor of story to arrive. The air shifts again, cooler now, carrying the faint tang of smoke and something savory that makes your stomach stir despite all the snacking. You follow the winding path until you reach a low amphitheatre carved straight into the hillside. Torches gutter along the stone seats, and in the centre pit, a flat slab serves as a makeshift stage. Upon it, skewers of figs and bits of cheese sizzle over glowing coals, tended by satyrs who look far too pleased with themselves. The audience is already gathering, lounging in semicircles, their hands busy with food rather than applause. The nymphs cradle clay cups, satyrs clink skewers like swords, and Dionysus sprawls across the top row, overseeing it all like a director half drunk on his own imagination. You slide into a seat, still sticky with honey, and realize this is more than a meal. It's the first experiment in turning eating into part of performance. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek theatre was deeply tied to religious festivals, particularly the Dionysia in Athens, where drama, song, and ritual drinking blended into one enormous civic event. Plays weren't solitary shows. They were woven into communal celebration, feasting included. Now for the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found charred animal bones near ancient theatres, leading to speculation that audiences roasted snacks right outside the performance space, possibly during breaks. Picture it, Sophocles' grand tragedy on stage, and just beyond the walls someone saying, "Pass the lamb skewer." Historians still argue whether audiences were allowed to eat inside the theatre, or if snacks were reserved for the outer courtyards. Tonight, though, the debate is resolved. Food and performance are inseparable. On the stage, two satyrs act out a ridiculous scene, one pretending to be a tragic hero, the other a meddling oracle. Instead of solemn prophecy, the oracle waves a cheese skewer, declaring, "Your fate is slightly overcooked." The audience erupts with laughter, spearing figs and cheese in solidarity. Someone tosses a fig onto the stage, which the actor catches mid-line and devours without breaking character. It is, in its own sloppy way, brilliant improvisation. You nibble a fig skewer yourself. The fruit bursts with sweetness, balanced by the salty crumble of cheese. It's oddly perfect for theatre. Bite-sized, handheld, just enough to savour during a pause in dialogue. Dionysus winks down at you from his lofty seat as if to say, "See, it's working." The nymph beside you whispers that some believe figs were Aphrodite's gift to humankind. symbols of fertility and pleasure. That adds a layer of mischief to every bite. Another leans closer and mutters that cheese-making was once thought a kind of sorcery, curdling milk into something far more potent. The combination feels like eating myth itself, half desire, half magic. As the play spirals into chaos, the satyrs throw skewers into the audience, daring them to join the act. One lands near your feet, still warm, and you realize you're no longer just a spectator. You're part of the performance, sharing food, sharing laughter, blurring the line between stage and seat. The fire crackles, the skewers dwindle, and the laughter lingers like smoke curling into the night sky. The amphitheatre feels alive, pulsing with the warmth of bodies and the rhythm of shared story and taste. It's not hard to imagine how this could become tradition, the first clumsy steps toward the theatre concessions we take for granted now. When the embers fade, Dionysus claps once, the sound echoing like a cue for the curtain to fall. Snacks, he says with mock gravity, are the true chorus of theatre. The audience roars their agreement, mouths still full. You rise slowly, following the tide of satyrs and nymphs out of the amphitheatre. The forest awaits again, quieter now, but the memory of laughter and roasted figs sticks with you. Somewhere in the distance, another smell calls. Faint, buttery, impossible to ignore. The buttery smell grows stronger with every step, winding between the trees like an invisible ribbon pulling you onward. At first, you think it must be roasted grain, or perhaps some lavish feast tucked away in the woods. But then you hear it, a soft popping sound, irregular yet rhythmic, like applause from a sleepy crowd. You follow the noise into a moonlit glade, where satyrs crouch around a clay pot balanced precariously over a fire. Every few seconds, the pot shudders, and a kernel bursts open into a fluffy white puff that escapes with a hiss of steam. You blink. Popcorn. Not the glossy, neon-buttered tub you'd find at a modern cinema, but unmistakable nonetheless. Pale blossoms of grain, tumbling out of the pot as the satyrs cheer each eruption like gamblers celebrating a lucky dice roll. Dionysus appears behind you, as if conjured by your surprise. "Don't look so shocked," he says, twirling a puff between his fingers. "Grain is grain, fire is fire. Sometimes they get bored and invent snacks." He tosses it into his mouth with a grin. "Here's your mainstream historical fact. Maize and popcorn are native to the Americas, cultivated by indigenous peoples thousands of years before Europeans ever set foot across the Atlantic. In truth, ancient Greece never knew popcorn. But tonight's dreamlike theatre blurs timelines as easily as the god himself blurs the line between performance and feast. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some early reports from explorers described popcorn garlands used in ceremonies, not eaten, but worn like jewelry. Imagine an oracle at Delphi trying to look serious while draped in edible necklaces. Historians still argue whether ancient audiences anywhere regularly ate during performances or whether Dionysus would have approved. Judging by the scene before you, the answer is a resounding yes. The satyrs are already treating the popcorn like a sport. One tries to catch kernels in his mouth as they leap from the pot, missing more often than not and chasing them through the grass. Another insists that each pop is an omen, leaning close to declare that 3 in a row means the play won't flop. A nymph offers you a handful. The kernels are slightly smoky, not quite salted, but still warm and crisp in your palm. You pop one into your mouth, and it crunches with a satisfying crackle that somehow belongs perfectly to the night. Dionysus spreads his arms like a conductor as the satyrs begin tossing popcorn at each other, then at the sky, then at the trees. What began as snacking quickly escalates into full-blown spectacle. The kernels rain down, some sticking in honey-stiffened hair, others rolling like snow across the grass. The audience howls with laughter, and for a moment you realize that this is it. The birth of theatre snacks, not from necessity, not from hunger, but from pure joy of shared absurdity. The god leans close to you, voice low. "Remember this, traveller. The play may end, the masks may fall, but the taste, the smell, the silly little rituals, that's what lingers. Snacks are memory disguised as food." His breath smells faintly of figs and wine, his grin wild and serene all at once. The fire dies down, the last kernels pop, and the clearing quiets into a hush as though the curtain has dropped on the final act. You sit with the aftertaste on your tongue, realizing how strange and comforting it feels to end with something so familiar, so modern, nestled in such ancient myth. The satyrs begin to doze, curled in piles, bellies full. The nymphs hum lullabies that seem to ripple through the trees themselves. Dionysus stretches, yawns, and vanishes into shadow without so much as a goodbye, leaving only the faint crackle of cooling embers behind. You lean back on the grass, staring at the stars that spill across the sky like scattered kernels of light, and slowly, softly, the whole strange evening folds around you like a blanket. Wind down, 300 words. The glade grows still, the smoke thinning into the night, as if even the fire has grown drowsy. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of crickets hidden somewhere in the undergrowth. The sweetness of honey, the warmth of roasted chestnuts, the crisp crackle of popcorn. Each flavor drifts across your memory one last time, dissolving like shadows at dawn. You let your shoulders soften, the weight of the night easing out of your body. Around you, the forest seems to exhale, its branches swaying with a quiet patience. The torches have burned low, their flames no longer sharp but trembling, gentle, like candles in a chapel. Every sound is softened, every shape blurred by the calm that follows celebration. The laughter of satyrs lingers faintly, fading into the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of warmth, of memory, of stories that keep whispering even as you drift away. You picture Dionysus, not wild and chaotic, but smiling faintly in some corner, satisfied that his little invention, snacks shared among friends, has left you drowsy, comforted, and maybe just a touch amused. Your eyelids feel heavier, as if weighed down by centuries of tales retold and retwisted. The ground beneath you feels softer than any mattress, the stars above steady and kind. You no longer need to move or chase the story further. It has carried you exactly where you need to be. So rest here, with the taste of myth still on your tongue, the hum of the forest like a lullaby, and the certainty that even the gods would approve of your nap. Let yourself sink, let your breathing slow, and let sleep take its gentle bow.